Is it moral to treat people with respect? Well, sure, absolutely. That's a moral conversation. Is it moral to make sure that our customers or our patients receive maximum value for their investment in us? Well, sure. Is it moral that we give people a livable wage? Well, absolutely. And so a lot of conversations about values, they sort of get colored through this lens of morality. And that's fine, that's terrific. But there's another side argument that I think we need to really begin to understand. And frankly, I think we need to be making this argument strongly. And that's that values can drive the experience of the workforce. It can drive the experience of the patient. It can drive the ultimate value of the customer.
Hello, Dan. It's really great to see you today.
Thank you.
Great that you could make it today. I'm talking today to Dan Edds. He is a management consultant in the field now for over 25 years. So with a lot of experience, with a lot of organizations which he has consulted, which he has seen in his lifetime. And he's now just completing his book, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this book, which is coming out soon. And we'll put a link of where to get this book in the description of the video. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because you have found something in your journey of consulting which made you write this book. So the book is also about a certain kind of discovery which you made, or an insight into leadership and management. And so please tell us more about this journey and this discovery.
Okay, well, thank you, Luke. And it has really been a journey. And there has been no one point in time where I got this big aha idea. It's been a series of events that finally triggered a thought that something else is going on. So in 25 years of consulting, I've worked with lots of different organizations, a lot of public sector organizations, healthcare, nonprofits, several commercial organizations. And many of the projects that I complete, they go terrific. There's a lot of excitement at the end. The teams feel a sense of empowerment. We're going to really improve our operations. And, a lot of the projects go on and the organizations are really helped. But there's more of my projects than I would probably care to admit, where I finish the project, lots of excitement, the teams are excited, the future looks bright, or at least it looks brighter than what it has been. And come back a few months later, 6 months later, and nothing has changed. And there was one event, it happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago with a statewide Department of Motor Vehicles, or Transportation Department, actually, excuse me. And they asked me to come in because there was this one division that was, morale was low. They had a lot of layoffs and budget cuts in the last recession. Staff were overworked, lots of weekends, lots of overtime. And they asked me to come in and to do a lean workshop, help them identify their business processes and improve them, and maybe improve the whole organization. So I did that. We spent 4 days together. And at the end of the 4 days, we had beautiful value stream maps up on the wall. We had discovered that every invoice that they processed had to go over the desk of the financial manager upwards of 7 times before it was ever processed and paid. And since they were a funding agency, they processed a lot of invoices. And we got done with the project. We had 3 or 4 really good initiatives to improve the organization laid out. The team had designed them. There was nothing in these initiatives that would have required any money, any financial appropriation at all. The governor wouldn't have had to sign off on anything. They could have just taken it and run with the initiatives. But at the very end, something happened that really caught my attention. One of the senior members of this division, and he was kind of a tall guy and kind of big. He grabbed the manager by the lapels of his sport coat, almost lifted him off of his feet. He was probably on his toes, physically shook him and said, if you don't do something with this, meaning all of the work that we've just done, if you don't do something with this, don't ever, ever, ever ask me to participate in something like this ever again. And he wasn't violent, but he made his point abundantly clear: do something or be quiet. And so the manager is going like, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And as a point of just courtesy, we decided to take the project to the executives within the department, big department. And just out of courtesy, we thought it'd be a good idea, let them know what we had done. And so we spent an hour with them reviewing what we had done, reviewing the results. They were thrilled, happy to see the work that had gone on. And behind the scenes was the fact that our governor had just been elected on a platform of a more efficient government. And he had, in fact, used the words lean as a way of getting to a more efficient government. So the executives of this organization could now go to the governor and tell them that they were implementing lean, that they were becoming more efficient, and they could then tell the governor that they were actually implementing his wishes and desires. Everything was wonderful. At the very end of this 1 hour meeting, they said, oh, by the way, could you just keep, and they mentioned a woman who was not there, one of the other members of the executive team, mentioned her by name. Could you just keep her abreast of your progress, what you're doing? Sounded simple enough, but that's where everything died, because the members of our team that we'd worked with, as soon as they saw we have to report to this person, that meant that now she is in charge, and therefore we have to wait to be told what to do. And nothing was ever implemented. And that crystallized for me that so many times there's something else going on that's unseen, it's almost in the background, but I got wondering what that is. And through kind of a long story, which I won't go into, I realized that there was a system of leadership that was in place that actually prohibited innovation, people initiating work that would improve their work, that would improve their processes. The system said, if you're a leader in this organization, you do what you're told, and then you just tell people below you what to do. And so ratchet forward a couple of years, and I had been asked by the CEO of a small rural hospital to come in and help him design a model of leadership that basically says, if you're a leader or a manager in this organization, this is how you do it. And when I was meeting with him, I said, I'd be happy to help you do that, but you need to understand something. Fundamentally, I believe that leadership is more about the system than it is the individual people. And if we're going to do this, the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is, what do you want the system to produce? And he said, that's exactly what I want to do. And without exaggeration, I walked out the door and I said, now how in the heck am I going to do that? But that was the start. And that sort of laid the foundation for really what has now been a 3-year research project, really looking at what does it mean to have a system of leadership. If I saw one walking down the street, would I recognize it?
And you also recognized some systems, and the what became sort of fascinating for me when I heard about that was that everybody talks about values, right? So you always have to have a value statement, a mission statement, and all that. And what we can observe in the field when looking at organizations and businesses is that sometimes this is seen, okay, I also need to do that, right? I have to have my strategy, I have to have my systems, my policies in place, and then also my values. But you came to a very different kind of conclusion. So please tell us what is the mistake of thinking like that, and how would it be done properly?
Yeah. Well, I think, organizations do, in fact, most organizations in this day and age, they do have a mission statement. They do have a set of core values. Mission statement can be high profile. People talk about it. Values, I find, organizations will come up with core values. They may put them on a little poster someplace on the wall. They may post them on their website. That's about as far as they go, too often in my judgment. So what happens from the standpoint of leadership is that everybody leads based on their own personal values. So if you and I were leaders in an organization without any corporate direction, you would lead according to your values, I would lead according to mine, and everybody else would lead essentially according to their own personal values. And that's great as long as everybody's values are exemplary, but we all know that that's not always the case. And in my research, I really got looking at the crux of my research was this question. Organizations that perform at an elite level for a sustainable period of time. I'm not talking about a year or two or three, but 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 years that consistently perform at a high level. How do they approach leadership? And is there a systemic nature to their leadership? And when I got looking at them, and actually when I first had to find these organizations, and that was a whole journey in itself, what I found was that they take leadership very seriously. And in fact, every time I found sustainable excellence, superior performance for a long period of time, that's exactly what I found. The evidence of a strong system of leadership, beginning with core values, mission. But there was something else that I found that was maybe even more important than mission and core values, although they're related. And that is a sense of purpose. It's not the purpose of the organization, but when we look at systems and systems theory, every system produces something. It doesn't matter if in our bodies there's 11 objectively identified systems functioning within our human bodies right now. There's the circulatory system and the muscular system and the skeletal system. Well, each of those systems produce something, and they produce something of value to the whole. And within our bodies, those systems are all interconnected. What I found with these really high-performing organizations is that they start designing, and that's actually is the key word. They actually design a system of leadership for themselves, and they begin with that purpose, which when people look at it would say, well, that's a core value, but it's actually more than that. So, for example, one of my case studies is with a healthcare system. They have a large hospital, many clinics around the general metropolitan area, workforce of about 5,000 people. And if you were to ask, I'm quite confident in this, if you were to ask any one of their leaders, their clinic managers, anybody with a management or a leadership responsibility, what is your core purpose as a leader? What's the core output of you as a leader? I think they would say respect. And they define respect as respect for the worker, respect for the work, and respect for the patient. And that's that value of respect, and it's singular, it's transcendent, but that value of respect drives everything that they do and how they do it. And it's really a remarkable system. probably one of the clearest systems of leadership I found.
I mean, that's so interesting. You told me before of this example, and I was really stumped by it because a clinic, you could argue, has the value of providing public health, right? And no, they say our core value, our purpose is respect. And there is also some sort of, there was also genesis of that, some development, what led up to that point. Maybe you can tell us about that, because that's so interesting how they came up with that and why respect actually does provide public health. Why does it provide public health?
Yeah. It's really the stepping stone to public health. So this is an organization that's been around since the 1920s. Stellar reputation, long time. 1998, and then again in 1999, they had back-to-back years of financial loss. Even though they're a nonprofit, they still have to have enough revenue to pay their bills. Well, they had 2 years back-to-back where they lost money, first 2 years in their history. And they really saw that they needed to do something different. Also, about the same time, a report came out that that documented that in the States, 98,000 people died every year due to preventable accidents in hospitals. And additional research after that actually shows it's substantially higher than 98,000. But they took that information seriously, and they realized that they needed to change. They also realized that healthcare in general needed to change. And so they got looking around for models that would improve the quality of healthcare and lower cost. And they couldn't find any. There's no models that they could follow that would improve the patient experience, improve clinical outcomes, and at the same time lower cost. And so they eventually identified the Toyota production system, how Toyota builds cars, and they thought that might work. And so you can imagine professional healthcare workers, well-educated doctors and nurses, well-educated administrators watching the executive leadership team, which was like 32 or 33 people, heading off to Japan to learn how to apply the way Toyota built cars in a hospital. It didn't go over too well, but they learned enough in Japan. They said this could work. And so they became the first healthcare system in the world to adopt the Toyota production system as the way they would deliver care to patients. And I believe they brought that value of respect from Toyota to their healthcare organization. And they began to say, okay, if respect is the output of our system, what does that mean? And that begins all of a sudden, okay, if it's respect for the patient, and this is actually one of their stories, well, why is it that our physician offices and executive offices are all in the prettiest parts of the building with the great scenic views of the city? If we really respect our patients, why do we put our offices there? And if we really respect our patients, why do we keep them waiting 45 minutes or an hour for an appointment? And if we really respect our workforce, why is it, and actually this is one of their studies, only 35% of the time a nurse, of the total nurse's time was actually spent with patients. So they began to say, well, if we are about a culture of respect, what does that mean? And eventually they would turn those relationships around. So now a nurse will spend 90% of their time with patients, 10% of their time doing paperwork and whatever else. Guess what? Nurses have more fun when they're actually spending time helping their patients, because that's what they went into nursing to do. And and the same thing for the work. So they put a high value on the work itself. They are in healthcare. it's important work. And so that value of respect drives all of those relationships that they're making with patients, with the workers themselves, and just with the nature of the work.
I I really have to repeat that because it's sort of hard to believe. It's like listening to some sort of fantasy, right? But the way because the clinic exists and there's many more examples in your book, is, let me get that right again. So they came out and said, okay, respect is the most important output of our system, our core value, our purpose. And they really looked at everything and said, okay, if that is really true, how do we organize the time, the processes of our workforce? How do we organize our infrastructure, basically? Does that reflect respect? How do we treat the patients, or how do we make also patients, I think that's what you also mentioned in our previous talk, like a collaborator in their personal health, which is the modern way also to look at healthcare, that the patient also carries responsibility, and you need respect actually to engage a patient to do that. Yeah. So, I mean, the ramifications are enormous. Like you really have to really rethink everything, how you organize things, right. how you write your guidelines, right? How you write your policies, how you organize your work. Right. It must have been. Isn't that also overwhelming for the people managing and being responsible and leading such an organization? How are they able to do such a change process?
Yeah, well, I'm sure it didn't happen overnight. In fact, I'm quite confident it did not. But to your point, one of their stories that's kind of recent, they had just opened up they were getting ready to open up a new cancer care facility, and they were laying out the office for where this facility would be housed. And as I understand the story, they had this, it was all in schematics. And so they were looking to identify where individual physicians would have their workspaces and their offices. And I guess they walked in and it looked like, they had offices around the outside perimeter of the facility right by the windows. And so all the doctors were saying, well, I want that office, and that's going to be mine, and that's going to be mine. And finally someone said, well, wait a minute. What does that say about respect for the patient? And that's when they realized, oh, if we are really respecting the patient should get the value of a window looking out in the city. There, it's on a hill, and there's a beautiful, it's mountains and water seen below the hill. So we should really give the patient that view as opposed to the doctor. And so the doctor said, oh yeah, we have to operate in this thing called respect. And so they put their offices in back up against a wall, as opposed to, the great gorgeous views of their city. There's also a story, and I put this in the book, and it's a classic story. A nurse in the same oncology department was getting ready to administer chemo to a patient. And she noticed that there were 2 tests that were required for this particular kind of chemotherapy that hadn't been done yet. And so she asked the physician, should I go ahead, or should I order these 2 tests? And he said, no, it's okay. The patient doesn't need these 2 tests. But respect for the patient says, my most important relationship is in fact with my patient. And so she thought, I think the best thing to do is to make sure this patient has completed these 2 tests. And so she called the director of the oncology department, should I go ahead and administer these 2 tests? And he said, absolutely yes. And then he called the physician that she was working with and said, those tests need to be administered. Well, the physician then went back to the nurse and verbally abused her, ripped her to shreds verbally. The nurse then called up the director of oncology services and explained to him what had just happened. who then called up the physician who had verbally abused her and told him his performance was unprofessional and inconsistent with a value of respect, and pulled what would be the equivalent in Japan of pulling a cord on the Toyota manufacturing line where everything stops, so an error doesn't go forward. Well, he pulled that kind of a cord in the oncology department and told the physician he was going to be taken offline until his personal conduct could be evaluated. And as you can imagine, a story like that, how fast would it ripple through the ranks of the organization? Everybody at that point is going to be going and did, oh, this thing of respect is important. When a physician is taken offline, an important physician is taken offline to evaluate his personal conduct relative to respect, then you know it's really important. And it's important vertically and horizontally throughout the organization.
That's amazing. So so the processes are built off of these values and off the purpose, and that's why you say leadership has to be a system. It has to be understood as a system because it involves all of the organization and how it works, and there's a consensus, and not only consensus, there are certain processes in place. I think you also mentioned that it was agreed what behavior should be displayed, but you just mentioned several examples, not just about behavior, it's also about infrastructure, it's about how treatment is administered. Okay, let's say I'm now playing a little bit devil's advocate. Okay, so I have a company, I want to make some money. I've learned in business school, it's all about objectives and profit and numbers. And now somebody comes along and says, yeah, that's good to know these things, but actually it's about values. And I say, no, it's about money. So I want to make a lot of money, and you and your values, well, that's a nice to have, but I'm just looking at the numbers. And you hear that a lot when you talk to managers, not only in the private sector, but also in the public sector, which has been driven a lot by numbers lately, right? And they go like, yeah, but the numbers have to add up, and nobody is really asking about the values. So what would you answer such a person?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's an appropriate question too. Unfortunately, I think we when we talk about values, it's always sort of a moral conversation. Is it moral to treat people with respect? Well, sure, absolutely. That's a moral conversation. Is it moral to make sure that our customers or our patients receive maximum value for their investment in us? Well, sure. Is it moral that we give people a livable wage? Well, absolutely. And so a lot of conversations about values, they sort of get colored through this lens of morality. And that's fine, that's terrific. But there's another side argument that I think we need to really begin to understand. And frankly, I think we need to be making this argument strongly. And that's that values can drive the experience of the workforce. It can drive the experience of the patient. It can drive the ultimate value of the customer. In fact, with this healthcare that I mentioned, they don't talk a lot about values. They talk a lot about behaviors. They talk a lot about respect. But they don't talk a lot about core values, although I know that they're there. But they talk a lot about the perfect patient experience. You could say that's a value. They also talk about error-free healthcare. And you could say that's a value. But when they talk about it, what I hear them doing is combining the value, so that moralistic value, along with the hardcore data business operation of we have to produce something that's important, of value. And so if someone in a business said, well, values are great, but we have to make money, I would say exactly what Deming said, many years ago, that 90 to 95% of the of performance is really based on the system, and it's not the individuals. As individuals, organizationally, we work within systems. Whether we understand that or not, that's a different question. But we all work within systems. And so Deming was saying the system is responsible for performance for the most part. And so I would tell a business owner, listen, if you want to maximize the money you need to make, the money you want to make, if you want to maximize the return on your investment, you absolutely have to be leading in such a way that not only your values are modeled, but every other leader in that organization understand the values that need to be modeled. And here's the system, here's the rules and the regulations, here's our behavioral requirements for you as a leader to function in this organization. And when we see that, we begin to understand one of the core attributes of a system, which is a system always takes 1 + 1 and creates 10. One of the core attributes of a system is that a system will always take the elements of the system and multiply them exponentially. So when, let's say, a small organization with, well, not small, but say organizations, say with 1,000 people, they probably have somewhere in the area of 100 leaders or managers. So what's going to drive more value to the patient or the customer? What's going to create a better economic return if every one of those 100 leaders are all leading to their own personal set of values and the way they want to lead and taking the attitude of my team, my rules, my way, or if all of those leaders are in fact leading in a way that's systemic, that's been designed so that they are all leading to a common set of values, a common set of rules, routines, and behaviors that all are expected to model. Now all of a sudden, everybody, it's like the the competitive scullers on rowing. Everybody's rowing to the same cadence, the same rhythm, as opposed to one rower wanting to row at their cadence and another rower rowing to their own cadence, and we could imagine that would be chaos, which a lot of our organizations are in fact operating in chaos.
I mean, that's so interesting, this idea that, okay, yeah, you still have to have your books in order, you still have to do proper accounting, you should have some targets in place, that's a good idea, you should still be able to measure equality. But of course, that's just, let's say, one side of the coin, right? That's a good side to have of the coin. But if you don't have the other side of the coin, which, as you say, interweaves with that, which is actually then, because that creates then the experience, the numbers in themselves, without the context, don't give you that much data anyway. Like, you just look at the numbers, but what do they mean? Well, the experience then delivers you that meaning. And if you have to look at both things, which are in themselves quite paradoxical. Perhaps that's why we like to also train leaders in paradoxical thinking or non-dual thinking, to say both of them are equally important. And it's not making the choice between either or. It's about keeping the balance, or trying to work with that paradox and with that tension. So that's so extremely interesting what you're saying, especially in terms of the experience, which of course again creates meaning for those having the experience, be it a customer who has a great product and has a great experience and this is meaningful for the customer, or is it a patient, or is it one of the workforce who experiences meaning with through the interaction with the patient or the customer, and says, I'm having a great experience, so I'm highly motivated, I love going to work, I love doing my job because it gives me something in the process which a spreadsheet just doesn't deliver. So so that's what I'm sort of hearing from this conversation.
Yeah, one of the ahas in doing the research was, a lot of organizations that talk about the patient or the customer experience, and that's a fairly common conversation in business schools today. We all buy something online, and within 10 seconds of our purchase, we've got a survey in our email, and they want to know about our experience. What I found from these really elite level organizations is they put as much emphasis on the experience of the workforce as they do the patient or the customer. And if you think about it, that's really pretty logical, because who creates the experience of the customer? It's the workforce. If you want a certain kind of experience for your customer, simple logic would suggest maybe the workforce should have the same kind of experience as well, because that's what they're going to pass on. So if the experience of the workforce is they feel respect, they feel respected, there's a high probability that same level of respect is going to get passed on to their patients or their customer as well. Conversely, if the workforce feels disrespected, disregarded, their voice has no value, they're expected to come in and put round pegs in round holes. They're the best part of being human, the intelligence, the passion, the commitment, the ability to problem solve and innovate, if that's not respected or valued, well, I wonder why the level of customer service is so lousy in the world today. And people complain about it all the time. So one of the other things I saw with this healthcare organization was the way they think about money. And this is another one of the ahas, if you will, is that these high-performing organizations that I discovered, they have a different way of looking at money and people and knowledge. We all work in organizations where organizations are in existence because they have some kind of specialized knowledge and information. They know how to do software programming better than anybody. They know how to, do some kind of a manufacturing process better than anybody. That's why they're in business. Average organizations look at people and money and knowledge as assets that need to be managed, which is a diplomatic way of saying controlled. These high-performing organizations look at those resources differently, though. What I found is that those resources, those organizations look at people and money and information as resources that can be developed and grown and grown in such a way that they create more and more value for their customers or for their patients. So in this healthcare organization, as I mentioned, they're one of the first implementers of the Toyota production system in healthcare. In fact, they have actually spun off that expertise into something called the Virginia Mason Institute, and they teach healthcare organizations worldwide how to apply the Toyota production system in healthcare. And you'll never hear them, at least I don't think, my relationship with them, I've never yet heard them talk about money. What I have heard them talking about is process, getting more value out of process, reducing waste, eliminating redundant work. And so they see money as something that they can develop by reducing waste. And interestingly enough, during the last recession, 2007, 2008, where healthcare organizations across the states were laying off people, this organization didn't lay off anybody. In fact, they continued to pay financial bonuses to those leaders who were qualified for bonuses. They continued to pay bonuses throughout the recession. And I just got some, in fact, Friday, they sent me their latest results. 2020, they earned their 17th straight grade A from the Leapfrog Healthcare Hospital Safety Grade Program for preventing medical mistakes and other potential harm. That is a level of performance that's almost unheard of. June 2020, They were rated as they received the Health Grade's Outstanding Patient Experience Award for 8 straight years. Again, a level of performance that's almost unprecedented. 8 straight years of that kind of excellence. And they're placed in one of the top 100 hospitals throughout the states and have been for many, many, many years.
That's amazing.
And
So
you know,
I
you
just wanted to
certainly
ask you
can't.
something. What I wanted to ask you, I mean, one thing I think about your work, which is so important, is that you don't only make these claims that the value-based organization is then a higher performing organization. You also show how this is done, how to get from A to Z, basically, which I think is extremely helpful for people saying,
Yeah.
okay, how am I going to do that?
Right.
It sounds good, but how am I going to get there? The second thing which you mentioned, and again, I think that's so important. You said that at the beginning of our talk, is that they outperform other organizations. They outperform other businesses. Well, so there's already so many questions in my mind. One of them is, why don't more people then do it? Because we're living in a competitive economy where, yeah, if I don't do it, my competitor will do it somewhere around the road. And maybe then it would be a good idea to really take purpose and values seriously, have a conversation with my management team and figure things out and say, listen, this is central. We want to outcompete the others. We want to do better. We want to make more revenue. We want to provide better services. Is that really the case? Is that really what you were observing? That's my first question. Is this really true, or did I just hear this somehow? And the second question is, why aren't more doing it that way?
Yeah. So let me take the first one first. So yes, and the research, principally from Gallup, shows that you know, the organizations that have the highest level of engagement of their workforce have more profitability, greater customer experience, greater customer satisfaction, and on almost any level, their economic performance or healthcare performance, whatever kind of organization it is, their performance far outranks their competitors. And I saw that in abundance. The other question, why don't more people do it? I think that's for me, that's the $64 million question. But I think there's, and this is just strictly opinion, so take it for the value that it is. I think there's a number of factors going on. One is that, at least here in the States, the thinking about performance is incredibly short term. The average tenure of a hospital CEO is, I think, 4 years. The average tenure of a S&P 500 CEO, I think, is 5 years. The average tenure of a public school superintendent, I think, is 3.5 years. So, you know, as leaders and running organizations today, I think the time horizon gets really, really short, and I think that's a huge issue. I wasn't totally surprised, but one of the ways that I actually found I could discover a high-performing organization where the leadership actually was systemic was I looked at the tenure of the CEO. And if he or she had been around 2 or 3 years, I seldom saw any kind of a systemic approach to leadership. They've been around 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Then I began to see that systemic approach to leadership. And I think that short-term thinking is really problematic. And then I think there's also the whole issue of power. We put so much, at least here in the States, we put so much emphasis, and we take CEOs and the whole C-suite executive staff, we put them up on these pedestals and somehow think they're superhuman human beings. We pay them enormous salaries, and why should they care all that much about value the workforce experience. And so I think there's a lot of dynamics going on there. They really have to intentionally say, there's a way to do leadership in this organization that's going to maximize value to our customers, as well as create an experience of the workforce where they will want to work here. I think that takes some work, and it takes some thoughtfulness, and it takes a long-term view, which most of them don't get. They get paid based on a short-term time horizon.
Or it needs some sort of crisis and turnaround. Sometimes
Yeah.
you see a big awakening.
Yeah.
Now, the talking about awakening, I mean, values and purpose is also somehow, because it is so intangible, it is connected to some sort of belief system, right? You really have to believe and feel strongly about respect to really demand it from everybody, or communicate it to them that you would like to see more of this.
Yeah.
Now, that in itself, still, you could argue, okay, if I believe in something passionately, I will think about how to communicate this and convince others. But let's say I'm a young CEO, have my own startup or something. I want to attract the right talent. How do I find the right talent who believe in the same things I believe in, or complement my belief system in such a way that it amplifies it?
Yeah.
What advice do you have to give to people who are looking, who believe, okay, I got the message, I want to do it in this way, I'm enthusiastic, how do I find the right people?
Yeah, great question. So I would actually refer that question to one of the subjects of a personal interview about a year ago. This woman's probably early mid 40s. She is actually the principal of an elementary school, which in the States is from kindergarten up through the 5th or 6th grade. When she took over this school, it was failing on multiple fronts. The prior principal had been basically run out by the teachers union. And what I thought that she did that was absolutely brilliant, and this was her first opportunity to be a principal. But when I sat down with her, in fact, when I sat down with her, I said, I want to ask you about your approach to leadership. And she said, leadership? I don't know anything about leadership. And then she went on to design one of the most eloquent systems of leadership I found, probably outside the United States Army. And so when I started asking her about the purpose of leadership and what it was what leadership was to generate and produce, and I said, what are one or two words that you would use to describe the output or the end result of your leadership? She said, well, it's not going to be very popular, but love and grace. And I thought, okay, that's a little squishy for me. I'm not sure I would talk about that in a corporate setting. Kind of makes me a little nervous, but I like the idea because there's 450 elementary school children coming to school, and I kind of like the idea that they would have a principal that would love them. It sort of appealed to me. And she read my mind. She said, I don't use those words in the way you're thinking. She said, I use those words because sometimes I need to have difficult conversations, but I could do that in a spirit of love. And sometimes, she said, we need to have hard confrontational conversations, but she says, I have to learn to do that in a spirit of love. And at the same time, she's talking to me about collaboration. And what I realized is that, if you take, the DNA molecule, you got the double helix. Well, one side of that, her double helix was love and grace. The other side was collaboration. And so she wanted a workforce. And here in the States, educators, teachers are all considered educational leaders. And they're, if you're teaching in a classroom, you are the leader of that classroom. And so teachers are all treated as if they are leaders. And there's no debate about that. But she wanted teachers, she wanted a system of leadership that would produce collaboration amongst the teachers. And so as a team, she got her teachers together, and one of the things that she did was that she started talking about rules. And I thought this was absolutely brilliant. She said, okay, and they identified, and this is, the year before, the school had been in chaos, failing on multiple fronts. She's got the same teachers in a conference room. And they started talking about rules, and she said, let's identify all the rules that govern the way we treat each other and the way we operate. And so they put up on a wall, every rule, non-rule, anything that looked like a rule, they got it all up on the wall. And then she said, now, let's rewrite our own rules. And so they took time to write the rules of how they would interact together in a spirit of collaboration to bring about academic achievement to students. And she also did the same thing with some routines. They redesigned some of their routines. The other thing that she did, which I thought, again, was absolutely brilliant, she identified behaviors, and she combined behaviors with routines and rules. She put all of that, it wasn't just her, I mean, her whole team did this. They put all of that into a formal charter. And that's one of the other things I discovered, was that these high-performing organizations, they take things like rules, routines, and behaviors, they put it into a charter, and that becomes like their constitution. It's like their operating roadmap, if you will. Doesn't replace the normal stuff you got to do, in her case, to teach and to do the reporting and all the stuff you have to do for the state and the district. But it became the operating manual of how they would work together, so that when someone, one of the teachers or educators or administrators, decided they didn't want to behave that way, then her job was a whole lot easier. She would bring them into her office, show them that charter, and say, this is what we decided. This is what the team decided how we would relate to each other and to our students. And then have one of those hard conversations and determine whether or not that person really wanted to be in that organization. And some left, some were encouraged to leave, obviously. But the other thing that I noticed was that by having an identified value of collaboration, that said, this is how we're going to produce educational excellence, is when teachers are collaborating together. Well, the word gets around. Hey, I like the idea of collaboration. I like the idea of bouncing ideas off of a fellow educator so that our students can get the benefit of that collaboration. And what happened was the quality of her teachers began to go up as she really began to say, this is who we are, this is what we're about. So those people who didn't want to perform in that way, didn't want that collaboration, they just left or were encouraged to leave. They were replaced by people who wanted that experience, who wanted to go home at the end of the day saying, I think I did something important today. They weren't just there for a paycheck. So over time, not only did the educational excellence go up, but the performance and the skill sets of her staff went up as well.
So if I, in this case, you could say values and purpose as a means of interaction and transformation, right? So you also do your transformation process, right? Within that value system, yes, or within that purpose, you say, okay, if I'm interested in collaboration and want to see more of that, then how I approach it is in a collaborative fashion.
Right.
And so as soon as I meet somebody, I should observe that, let's say, value, how it is expressed basically in the interaction with me or my colleagues or an assessment center or something like that. So does that value, is that manifesting itself somehow? Yep. So I look at that and I go like, oh, that's I like that. I like what I'm seeing. So let's get this person. So that's how I understand it.
Yeah. It was the values that she brought, that whole idea of collaboration, love and grace, and that attracted really high quality people to her team. And so over time, just the skill sets of her staff just improved. And within 5 years, that school had gone from one of the lowest performing schools in a district of 25,000 students to one of the highest. And then over the next 3 years, they were actually breaking the achievement gap, which here in the States is the difference between rich and poor, minority and majority. They were actually closing those achievement gaps, which is just it was just a mammoth achievement. But it didn't happen overnight, but it happened pretty fast for an educational organization. It happened really, really fast.
Now, again, playing devil's advocate, some people might say, okay, I like the idea, it sort of makes sense. Values are and purpose are that which gives meaning to an experience and transforms people by noticing that values really do something, right? I mean, that's sort of like the essence of this conversation, is that people notice, again, it matters what you believe in. It's not, the world is not an empty nihilistic space without without meaning, without purpose. Purpose matters. It makes a difference in the world. It transforms you. It transforms the people you work with, and it produces value. It has a generative function. It can produce material goods and money and knowledge. It has this generative, and it doesn't so easily dissipate. It's not like you spend it one time, it's gone, but it is the generator of other good or other things. I understand that. Now, somebody else might say, well, what about if I want to have a very diverse set of people? Because I believe my organization should be very robust, and I would like to have a representation of different values, because I believe that different values, everybody brings something to the table, and so that just makes my organization more robust. What would you answer to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially here in the States right now. Lots of discussion, lots of conversation about diversity and the importance of diversity, the importance of having a diverse workforce, because the more diverse the workforce is, we end up, it improves creativity, it improves innovation, it improves our ability to market our services to a broader set of people, locally, overseas, et cetera. And my initial reaction would be, I think that's great. I don't have any problem with it. What I saw, though, is that these really high performing organizations, they're able to take that diversity and channel it. So another example is a small manufacturing company, 200 people. They design and manufacture really high-end custom commercial furniture. They do some residential, but mostly it's commercial furniture. And they have a very diverse workforce. If you were to walk into their lunchroom, it's very diverse. It smells like an international food court. Many of the people who work there it's their first full-time job in America. They've come from all over the world. They represent a melting pot of different cultures and values and ethnicities. But I think, and what this organization does is they start with, again, thinking about that the DNA model and the two sides of the double helix. One side of their double helix would be servant leadership. The other side would be engaging the staff engagement. And so they have developed a system of leadership based on the principles of servant leadership to produce, to have a workforce that is absolutely ferociously determined to find and identify waste and pull it out of their manufacturing system. And so what I saw in touring them and speaking with their CEO, what I found is that by starting with one or two transcendent values, and I hate that word, it makes me very uncomfortable. It's just a little too squishy for me, transcendent values. an MBA school, we didn't have one conversation about transcendent values. Sorry. But, you know, this manufacturing company, though, they said, okay, we're going to start with servant leadership, and we want our workforce to be totally engaged with what we're doing. Well, those twin sort of values, they're transcendent enough that everybody, by the fact that we're all human, we want to have a voice. We want to be more than putting round pegs in round holes. We want to be valued and respected. And by starting out with that base, and again, using this manufacturing company as an example, they initiate 1,000 to 1,250 Kaizen events every year. That's the workforce, not the senior executive leadership, not the president, the CEO. It's the workforce that are triggering all of these various opportunities to improve their systems and processes. And if they have more diverse people looking at their processes through different lenses, and then giving them the voice to say, that's great. It ends up putting more empowerment and more value on the individual member of the workforce, and they grow. They grow both as people, they grow in terms of value to the company. And so just give you an example, in my tour, I was listening to this one woman who was Caucasian, explaining how she had discovered a way of getting 5 parts out of this foam core material where she had been getting 4 parts for furniture. And I noticed that she would say, I went to my mentor to see if this was a good idea. And every time she would say mentor, she would sort of turn to this little lady from Asian woman standing next to her. And then she would be talking, and she'd say, again, I went to my mentor who mentored me through the process, and she would turn to this short Asian lady standing next to her. So finally, when she got done, I had to, ask the obvious question, is that lady your supervisor? And she looks at me almost like I was from outer space, and she said, yeah, but we just call them mentors. And what I saw in that exchange was that everybody has a voice, whether they're from, Asia, and again, this organization has people from all over the world that come here. They're immigrating to the States. This is frequently their first job. And they're bringing all of that diversity, but they're channeling it into help us find and identify and extract waste from our systems so that we could take that waste and pass it out to our customers in terms of value, to say nothing of, when we do that, your retirement account goes up as well. So we're giving value, generating value from you as well. So they're taking advantage of that diversity. It's not a conflict, but they're channeling it into engaging their workforce to find and eliminate waste in their manufacturing processes.
Well, I think that's a very optimistic note to leave the audience with, to say there's a certain universal aspect to the question of meaning and purpose and values, and that no matter where we come from, who we are, everybody somehow thinks about why are we here? What am I doing here?
Right.
Is looking for answers to that question, and has a more meaningful experience when there are some answers, or there is an environment where this can be explored, like in your case, exploration being what could be improved. And part of that process, I contribute to that. I'm more than this cog in the machine. And this is also seen by the outside, or this is also felt in the interaction with the outside. So that gives, I think that gives a lot of hope that we have much more in common as humans than actually what divides us. And hopefully we can contribute somehow to that through our means of leadership and management. And I think leadership should contribute to that kind of experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Probably one of the most important things that leadership can do is to contribute that sense of value to the workforce.
Mm. Well, Dan, thanks a lot for this amazing conversation about your new book coming out soon, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, right?
Yep.
So again, for those who are watching, I'm going to put a link here in the video description, and you can be also found on LinkedIn. That's how we met. If somebody is interested to reach out to you personally to find out more how to build these systems of leadership, how to make purpose and values really your foundation of what you're doing to generate performance and values and income and all these other good things, motivated workforce. I think that's so great that you're working on this, and I hope other businesses and organizations follow that model and just become also that meaningful place to work and to produce and to serve others. So thanks for this conversation. Really makes you feel optimistic about the future.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. See you soon.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.